All right, it's 7 p.m. So welcome everybody to Comics Writing, Publishing, and Promoting. Where do you start? So this is a panel. The idea is to promote a lot of the ways you can write comics write about comics instead of just writing comics themselves. So we're actually going to have each panelist introduce themselves for a minute or two, but we'll go around the table here.
Hi, I'm Phillip Ginn. I'm an independent writer and artist. I'm mostly self-published. I have done picture books and comics both independently by myself as both the writer and artist, as also in collaboration with other writers.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Marc Greenberg. I'm an attorney and law professor. I've been in practice for 45 years, which makes me older than dirt. Those are my books: Fandom in the Law, Comic Art, Creativity in the Law, and Copyright Termination Law. All of those books are available on Amazon. For the last 15 years, I've been representing comic book and graphic novel artists and creators. Probably the two best or most well-known of those clients are Emil Ferris, the creator of My Favorite Thing is Monsters, Volume 1 and 2. I'm her counsel. I also represent Derek Robertson, co-creator of The Boys, and Transmetropolitan and Happy, and a variety of other things.
Hi, I'm Kim Munson. I do something completely different. I write about comic art as art. I'm an art historian. I curate art shows. I write exhibit catalogs, that kind of thing. I also do biographies of creators, like reference-style biographies. So the book that I did the best with is Comic Art in Museums, which got an Eisner nomination a couple years ago. And it was the first book to analyze the history of comics exhibitions since 1930 into the present, and kind of put it in the context of all the different art movements that have happened. I have a couple books coming out next year: Dennis Kitchen Conversations and Trina Robbins Conversations. These are some of the shows that I've curated recently. Women in Comics, I did with Trina Robbins, and that was in New York and Rome, Italy. I did Colleen Doran Illustrates Neil Gaiman in New York and San Diego. And I just closed Beautiful Monsters, The Art of Emil Ferris in New York.
So I'm Alex, author of award-winning Understanding Superhero Comic Books. It's a best-selling book. It's been in the top 5 in its category in Amazon for a good while, and it kind of veers back and forth. I've been on a lot of different documentaries and whatnot, talking about comic history and the origins of it. It started with me being, in love with superhero comics when I was a kid, and that gravitated to other media. Started a comic book Facebook group called Comic Book Historians back in 2015. I started a YouTube docuseries and kind of wrote and edited a lot of comic history videos. And I also wrote article publications for the Comics Journal, different things in Tomorrow's, Back Issue Magazine, Alter Ego, Jack Kirby Collector. These are just the different projects I've been in. I've been on the Today Show and whatnot. And really just talking about comics, my love of comics. It really kind of was a social media thing that then turned into a real study of it. After grad school, I just kind of focused on this. And these are the different comics I've written. The Journey to Mexico limited series, and then I co-wrote Hashman with a good friend of mine whose father was key in the legalization of marijuana in the state of Washington. And I'm currently writing something called Origin Story with a friend, Anthony Tringali, who works in the movie business. And my book that I wrote is really a culmination of all the work I've done over 7 years or so. 1,200 endnotes, and really substantiated, and got a lot of good, reviews from different professionals in the comic field. So that's my story.
The idea is, like I said, to talk about the different ways you can write about comics, not just writing comics themselves. So my first question for all of you is, what is something unexpected you can share about your experiences so far being a writer, good or bad?
Any new project that comes up is going to present new challenges, and basically those are the unexpected things. When you're writing anything, you're literally just using the written word to convey information. And if you're aware of what you're writing for, what medium you're writing for, then the unexpected thing could be, what are the actual mechanics of the medium that you're writing for? So if you're a writer and writing rules, and you've written prose, you've written poems, you've written screenplays for TV or movies, you've written a play, and now you're trying to write comics. Technically, a script format is a script format, technically speaking. The written word is just the written word, technically speaking. There's sentence structure, paragraph structure, etc. If you're writing comics, I would say that I wouldn't say it's unexpected for me, but I would say unexpected in general. If you're learning how to write comics, the unexpected thing would be the uniqueness of the mechanics that comprises what comics are made of. Comics is a medium where the mechanics are unique unto itself. There is no motion and there is no sound. You could just convey the information that you want in your story, and hope that the artist that you're working with will convey in a sequence of pictures. Or you can study the mechanics of comics. I would say that in terms of, things being unexpected, for me, the most unexpected thing would be whether or not the thing that I'm writing is well received or not, or people like it or not. Most of the time, I don't really worry about that, though. Most of the time, I'm just worried about whether I'm writing a good story. I'm taking advantage of the medium that I'm writing for, and then I put it out, and then I just wait. And so the unexpected thing is the result, I would say.
Thank you. Two things unexpected that I had in my journey. I've written 3 books now and a number of articles over the years. The most interesting thing for me, years ago, I went to a signing by Patricia Cornwell, the fiction writer who does the Kay Scarpetta series that's going to be on television soon with Nicole Kidman in the lead role. And she said an interesting thing about writing. She said that in writing fiction, her characters help tell her the story. It's not she controls everything. Oftentimes, the direction of the story takes over. And I had to learn in my own writing to be open and flexible to the flow of the narrative. And sometimes it takes you down a rabbit hole, and you got to go down that hole and explore that. So that was an unexpected thing, to learn that you have to be flexible for that exploration. The other thing that was unexpected, because I write legal histories, is being at a con at one point, talking on a panel, and having somebody come up after the panel with a copy of my book and asking me to sign it. Nobody asks lawyers for their autograph, so that was kind of a cool and unexpected thing.
I think for me, the most unexpected thing is, and because of the way that my book came together and all the museums and everything else, I had over 100 collaborators on my book, which is unusual. But I meet these people everywhere, and it's sort of it's become kind of a big international network that I have, and people are constantly sending me stuff about shows they're doing, and it's just, I guess for me, like, the friendships that developed out of my book and the professional connections were really, really surprising to me.
Each different medium requires a different way you think about writing it. If you want to write a video script, it's really different than writing a comic script. And with a comic script, when you work with an artist, there is a collaboration, because they may actually visually think about it better than you will. And then when you see those pages come in, you're like, well, maybe I need to change up the way I'm writing this page, because it's going to actually flow better if I adapt a bit. So kind of sharing that storytelling makes for, I think, a more fun, visually engaging comic book. It's also important when you do write, let's say, a long form history book. That's really different, because you're using a lot of details, but you're using an overall theme or story or narrative to guide the whole thing, but you're implementing all these details along the way while you're putting a narrative that connects like thousands of details into a history book that actually makes sense. And then also being able to take advice from an editor that looks at it and says, okay, I like this, but I want you to do it over again. and then you just, you hear it, you understand it, and being able to work with an editor to get it professionally published so that it goes the distance. I probably did my history book like 12 revisions or something. It was kind of crazy, but I'm really glad I did, and I'm really glad they made me think about it. And listening to an editor, like being open to that, knowing that you are not, the end all be all of what people want to hear. You have to hear what other people are saying. You have to listen and let go of a little bit of control and adapt. I think that was one of the big surprises for me, but I enjoyed it.
Just quickly, he was talking about editing. In the kind of academic books that I do, peer review is a big deal. So it's like you do your first draft and the publisher sends it to like 2 anonymous people that criticize it, and then you can respond and change. And I actually really shifted the whole kind of flow of my book because it confused the people that were trying to read it. So it was actually really helpful for me. Some other scholars complain because like things get really nitpicky and everything, but I found peer review really helpful.
Excellent. That actually brings me to my next question, which is kind of a follow-up with that. The idea of creating comics and stories and storytelling to itself, but can you share about your process and your development for crafting a story, an idea, or a concept into something cohesive? Kind of what's your process from beginning to end? Unique narratives and perspective voices, balancing storytelling with narrative depth, and kind of those semantics and logistics.
When I'm crafting a story, my view's always been storytelling is more important than story. The Book of Eli is a really good example of that, which is a movie, if you've not heard of it, Denzel Washington. It's literally about a blind dude trying to get across the country with a book in a post-apocalyptic environment. That is the story. The story basically contains all of the very essential elements that comprises a concept. But storytelling adds detail and narrative mechanics. Pacing, is something going to be slow or fast? What's it going to look like? In a comic, there's a lot of mechanics there. You control time in a way that you can't control the way you can in TV and movies, because we're working with static images, we're working without sound. Everything needs to be drawn. You can do interpretive illustration, you can do realistic illustration, it could be abstract, it could be cartoony. So my thing is when I'm crafting a story that I've written, when I'm taking an idea and turning it into a concept, and taking that concept and turning it into an actual narrative, how am I taking advantage of the medium that I'm trying to convey my story in to take advantage of its particular mechanics? Because a story can be told in any medium. But if I'm going to tell it in a certain medium, I want to tell it in a way that can only be told in that medium. So The Sandman came out on Netflix about a year ago, and I have some Sandman fan art at my table, and people have come up to me and asked me if I like the show and what I think of it. And I say, you know what? It's beautiful. But the difference is, if you want to witness the story passively and watch something beautiful unfold, you watch the show. If you want to experience the story, you read the graphic novel. It was designed to be a graphic novel because that's the way he wrote it. That doesn't mean the story can't be told in another medium. When you read the story in a graphic novel format, it's a completely different conveyance. And that's really important. So you can take your story anywhere you want to, but when you're telling a story, take advantage of the medium. So that's what I try to do. If I put out a picture book last year, and I wrote it a specific way. I paced it a certain way because it's supposed to be a picture book. If anybody decides they want to turn to a movie, well, now I've got sound and motion and real time to deal with. So everything's going to be completely different. So the design of my story for a particular medium is a specific way. Comics are the same way. So I always approach it with storytelling in mind. It doesn't matter how simple or complex the story idea is. Storytelling rules for me.
So in writing histories, I usually try to start out with a theme, a concept that I want to explore. So my book, Comic Art, Creativity, and the Law, explains the intersection. I was wondering to myself, how does the law help comic creators and how does it hurt them? So half of the book is about obscenity law and how comic creators have been persecuted and by obscenity law cases. The other half explores contracts and the business side and how that works. So I started with the theme, Then I moved to research. And as I researched each of the areas, it started to evolve what I was going to write about. The research kind of drove it. And I had buckets of research. And then I started to sit down to assemble it all into a package. And at that point, I realized I had holes, places where I hadn't done the research. So I had to go back, wave 2 of research to kind of fill everything in. Then, and true confessions, we're married. Kim and I are husband and wife. We both write completely different ways of writing. I'm a very linear writer. I start with page 1, and I finish with the last page. Kim starts somewhere in the middle and works out. She builds, as an artist, she creates collages. So be open to the fact that you just need to find your own process, and there is no one process that works.
Well, why I end up starting in the middle is, with comic art in museums particularly, I was coming up with the whole kind of chronology of art exhibits and how they fit into like all of the different art movements at the time, and like, you know, who thought comics were garbage and who thought comics were interesting. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of business stuff that's related to this. But so I started with the sort of the time period where I had the clearest story that I could really get on a roll. And once I got started with it, then like Marc said, I'd do more research and fill in gaps and all of that stuff. The other thing that's kind of similar with the exhibits that I do, it's kind of the same thing where a person shows up in the museum and they're going around the gallery, and there needs to be a narrative to help people understand like that artist's work and why they work the way they do, and like kind of the common storyline between all the pieces, because otherwise it's just a bunch of stuff on the wall. You know, people need a story, but they can only read so much in an exhibit. So it's really kind of a balancing act between giving a little bit of text and getting in the way of the artwork.
I think the one kind of unifying thing is I try to come up with some sort of arc to the thing, some sort of almost psychological arc to it. So in the Journey to Mexico comic, it was about a young boy becoming a young man while he's learning his superpowers in 1830s Mexico, while Mexico is also freeing itself of its dependence on Spain in the background. So putting those two things together as an arc kind of made it, make sense to me. For the Hashman one, it was how does a drug dealer, redeem himself and find some sort of character redemption and meaning in his life to try to rationalize to himself he's not a bad person by doing something for society. So there was something to that. With the Understanding book, it starts with different media coming together to create the first comic books, but then how do you historically tell that 20th century growth? And I did it through like a psychological lens of the stages of kind of human degradation, which is, the idealism of the 40s, the interest in science of the 50s, anxiety of the 60s, the fear of death in the 70s, the selfishness of the 80s, and then how then it stops becoming superheroism and then backing up from that after that and kind of going back to try to more hopeful tone. But by putting that into a lens of almost a psychological, I think it makes the arc of the history book more interesting. So I try to put an arc to everything I do.
I just want to add one last thing. I've not met these folks till before today, but clearly everyone here knows what they're doing, and they have a lot of knowledge and experience. And what's most evident is that we all have different answers because we all approach our process differently. And I think that what's really important to convey here is that we do what we do the way that we do it because we found we found a method that's comfortable for us to approach what it is that we want to convey in the written word or for whatever medium that we're writing. But then maybe one day Alex will wake up and be like, you know what? I'm just going to pants it. I'm just going to start with page 1. I have no idea what the middle ending is going to be. I'm just going to figure out what's going to happen as it happens, as opposed to what he might normally do. Everybody in this room, all of you guys went to school, and all of you know how to write. You all were educated from elementary school through college, wherever you are at your life. You know how to write sentences, paragraphs. You've all written essays. You know what a beginning, middle, and end is. I think what's most important is to take what you've learned about writing up to wherever you're at in your life, and then adapt it to the thing that you want to write. So if we're talking about comics specifically, it's a weird question to answer because we don't have a lot of time to talk about 3-act structures and 5-act structures and page turns and, left and right pages and spreads versus webtoons. That's all like minute detail stuff. What's really important is knowing what it is that you're writing for and taking everything that you've learned about writing and being able to adapt. I think that's the most important thing, because whether you're this guy writing from page 1 to the end, or Kim writing from the middle out, or Alex thinking about the story arc, they've taken what they've learned about writing and adapting to what it is they're going to convey. Adaptation is the most important thing, because what we do is a very creative process, and you can't be creative without being adaptable. I think that's really important.
The other thing I want to make sure that I tell you guys is thinking is actually part of the process. I would always get mad at myself because, words on paper are tangible. And I'd be thinking and thinking and thinking, and I'm like, oh man, I'm not getting anything done. But, that thinking is really part of the work, and you can't beat yourself up because the words aren't coming fast enough.
Man, that is some fascinating stuff. For me, the next kind of question kind of goes into publishing and promotion and kind of that stage of writing. Can you share about your experiences and your progression in getting your work published, including barriers and limitations that you faced along the way, and kind of the experience in working with others, because that process of getting work published definitely involves a lot of people.
I'm a self-publisher. There was a point in my life where I wanted to be traditionally published, and then I came to the point where I just realized that I really actually very much like being in the indie space. And not that I wouldn't accept a job at a publisher, but the indie space is where I feel the most comfortable. I have the most control of what I'm doing. So the biggest obstacle for me in terms of self-publishing is me. I am my own biggest obstacle, whether it's getting the work done, choosing to do it, sitting down to write. Oh boy, making yourself sit down to write can be difficult if you have a day job and you're tired when you get home and you just don't have the willpower, or hey, I should get up early in the morning and I'll write just write a page. So that is the biggest obstacle, is yourself. Me, I'm my biggest obstacle. Then after that, everything else is about finding solution. I have met many independent creators say comics are, self-publishing comics, indie comics is really expensive. And it can be, but that's where your creativity is supposed to come in. There's a solution to it. I don't have a lot of money. I can't do a print run, but I have the internet, and there's a thing called WordPress or Wix. You can get a free site, and, even if it's Tumblr, nobody uses Tumblr anymore, but if it's online and you can post to Instagram, which is still free, or Blue Sky or Twitter or whatever, just because nobody uses a thing anymore doesn't mean that it's not online. And if it's online, you can link to it. So let's say that you're using something antiquated, and I'm going to post my comics on Tumblr. Nobody uses Tumblr, but people use Instagram, people use Facebook, people use Blue Sky. So now all I have to do is set up my profile and, hey, read my comic. Boom, there's a link. And then I can do some free events locally, which is very, very grassroots. You can do podcasts. There's all sorts of solutions to whatever obstacles there are, whether it's financially or materials. People who, I can't afford a tablet. That's what pencil and paper are for. This stuff is super cheap. I can't afford Bristol board. I can't afford Indie ink. I can't use a nib. I can't use a brush. Then pick up a pencil, get some copy paper, steal it from work, and draw a comic on this. take a photograph with your iPhone, clean it up, crop it out, and post it online. Is it going to look like a Marvel comic book? Probably not. But if your storytelling is good, if the writing is good, then and it's online and people can get to it, that's step number one. Your biggest obstacle, my biggest obstacle, is always going to be you, me.
I saw a couple people nod their heads when I mentioned Emil Ferris's My Favorite Thing is Monsters. Great graphic novel, million seller. Emil works in Bic pen. That's what she uses. That's her medium. Inexpensive Bic colored pens. So I agree. It doesn't have to be high-end, big buck stuff. Couple quick things about the process. Most of my work is on the mainstream side of comics, and so most of the clients that I represent are either writers or artists who are working with each other. And the first thing I tell them is get a collaboration agreement together. Get an agreement between you, the writer, and you, the artist, so that you jointly share responsibility, you co-own the copyright, you have to make decisions mutually. I've seen too many creative partnerships fall apart because the parties never sat down and worked out their working relationship up front. So that's a very important part of the process. Another important part of the process is learn how to create a pitch. Learn how to create a proposal that you bring to somebody to say, here's my book. Whether it be a comic book, novel, graphic novel, whatever it is, publishers want a pitch. They want you to describe what it is that you have that you're going to sell or propose to them. And then they want to know, who's the market for this? Is there an audience? Because they often don't know, and you know better than they who the market is. So this is one of the areas where if you've done indie publishing and you've built a market, you can, when you then approach a legit straight publisher, you say, my indie comic has a 30,000 distribution. That many people have linked to it. Now a publisher says, oh, this is somebody who can sell books. And so it's very important to learn how to do a book pitch or proposal. Go online, do some research about that. Really important thing to do. So collaboration agreements and book pitch proposals are two things I would say are very important to getting yourself published.
Well, kind of building on what Marc was saying, my book, the academic publisher that published my book had no idea what market would be interested in my book. And it turned out that it was museum bookstores that really wanted to cover my book, and they had no way into those places at all. So as I've been doing exhibits, all of the different museums that have been showing my exhibits carry my book in the bookstore, and I sign and all of that stuff. But, you know, over time I've gotten in a lot of bookstores, and you know, this was something that my academic publisher just had absolutely no idea about. And when I first proposed my book, I was really lucky that I had a couple champions that were really part of my network and very influential. One, the historian Brian Walker was one. You know, because the press had never, you know, I did the first book on this topic, so the press had no idea what they were going to do with it and what it was going to look like. So, you know, sometimes, you know, you've just got an idea and you've got to run with it. And I was really glad that I got my book done.
The comics I did were self-published through my comic book historians presence, and the Understanding book was published by McFarland, and I worked with their editor quite a bit to, you know, get it to the standard they were comfortable with. What I did find is, because I've spent, you know, these past 7 years on YouTube and TikTok and the podcast world and Instagram and whatnot, that, you know, I have a pretty good selection of where I can push my stuff, and I try to do it in a tasteful, artful way. But I've been really thankful that I've been able to use those avenues to get the word out so people know about it. And So you'll see I do a lot of stuff on TikTok and on YouTube Shorts that point back to my book in some form. And I do a lot of I do motion comic animation, my own, that I've used to create little presentations on YouTube that make people interested in the comics I did, so that I feel like I'm using that internet space in its various ways has been very helpful for me and I think that's what gets my book, high in its category in a recurrent fashion, is because of I just never really let up on that aspect of it. I think the promotional aspect does matter, and I'm pretty good with audiovisual editing and whatnot, and I just kind of use that as my own little side superpower to help get my word out like that.
Let me just add one thing quickly. A publisher friend of mine told me publishing companies love highly motivated authors who will go out and promote their work, authors who will go out and sell the work, because honestly, the marketing departments in most publishing companies aren't worth a whole lot.
I just wanted to quickly mention that I self-published 2 exhibit catalogs in the beginning to teach myself how to structure a book, and I really learned a lot from doing that.
So my next question kind of is a follow-up that is within the publishing industry itself, especially being a librarian. We want to have physical and digital materials, and especially as creators and people who write, you guys definitely have to navigate that on the back end of things. But can you describe your experiences in navigating the digital versus print publishing realm, or at least any experiences you've had?
I currently have a day job, and I work in print. I'm a pre-press expert, and so my advice usually is to design for print first, because then you can take everything that you've done and do whatever you need to put it online. Switching it around is usually more difficult. If you're creating for digital first and then going to print, you're not really going to be guaranteed to have appropriate files. Let's put it that way. If you're creating on Procreate, for example, and you're doing the default 72 DPI at whatever dimensions, and you want to print that, it's going to look like to put it politely, it's probably not going to look very good. If you're designing something for the digital space and you create it at digital specs and then you want to print it, it's probably not going to look very, very good, because print requires more robust files, to put it very generally. So digital is very easy because it's at our fingertips. You can literally sign up for a free account on Instagram or any social media and post your comics on social media. But everything that you do, whether you're doing it traditionally and scanning it in, or you're creating a digital file in Photoshop, Procreate, Sketchpad, whatever, should be done at print specs. And if you're going to ever print your comics, it should be done in a manner where it's going to be conducive to print. So if it's going to be a book, whether it's going to be an odd size or traditional size or an oversize or a miniature size, it should be done in a way where it's fairly adaptable to the format. So if you want it to be a portrait size, whether it's going to be 6x9, 5x7, 6.65 by 10, 10 and a quarter, which is general standard American comic book size, all that stuff is portrait. And so if you draw your stuff on quote unquote standard American proportions, then you can technically take your art and adapt it to anything portrait. It's just going to look a little different inside that, but at least it'll be print ready. But Webtoons is not the same format. Webtoons is, but you can take those panels now that you've set them up for print, and now you can break them up in such a way where it's easy to scroll. The storytelling is not going to be the same. The navigation is not going to be the same, obviously. You're getting rid of page turns. You're getting rid of corner to corner, backed up to corner, down to corner, page turn. You're getting rid of all of that. You're getting rid of taking a look at a double page spread and taking a look at the whole layout and how that affects you as a story. And now you're looking at a strip of panels. So keep that in mind. but you can format your print file in a way where it still makes sense and you're reading panel by panel. You can break that up. So my advice usually, and maybe someone has a different opinion, but my advice is to design for print first, because that is much more restrictive. The digital space is much more flexible, but it's harder to go from something that flexible in the digital space, which requires a whole lot less robust files, to go to print.
One point to be aware of is if you're doing purely digital comics, you are cutting yourself out from one market, which is the market for original art. There is no original art with a digitally created comic. And so there's a very lucrative market for original art. I saw a beautiful piece by Jean Giraud Mobius, the wonderful French illustrator at Society of Illustrators show. It was an 8x10 mandala that he drew that was for sale, the original, for $80,000. So that's definitely something to keep in mind with respect to that transition. One of the things that I'm seeing an awful lot is my clients who are creating original art, when they're selling or licensing it, we're now adding a clause that says you cannot use this art to train AI. And that's going to be something you need to be keeping in mind as you are working through that digital space, is to be aware of the implications of AI in that space. So a couple things to think about.
Well, I have to be honest, I haven't done a lot of digital because my academic publisher automatically does an ebook along with everything. But one of the books that I self-published, the artist I was working with is in the UK. And so I had to make sure that I picked a distributor that printed in the UK. I used Ingram Spark, because they printed there. And their books were already kind of expensive because they were very very image heavy. So it really saved a lot in the production cost to have everything printed in the UK. And I had to learn InDesign myself and supply that, so that was an experience.
For the self-published stuff, it was, when I worked with the artist, it was all art. It was all done, as an original page, but you can convert, let's say you make a PDF or whatever out of a comic, out of those pages, you can convert that to like Kindle format or digital format also, and then you can then have it out there in both formats. For the published history book I did, like Kim said, they already do the ebook version anyway. But the one thing I did on mine was, I'm good with audio engineering and whatnot, and so I asked them about the audiobook option, and they said, yeah, we'll put you in the queue for that, and someone will read it, and I just wasn't sure how that was going to turn out, and so I'm a little OCD on that end of things, and so I just have my own little studio at home, which isn't that fancy, but it works, and I recorded my own audiobook, each chapter, and then I did all the audio editing and got the background noise out and improved the fidelity, took out every breathing sound. It took me like 4 months. It was crazy work, but it was really I really feel like it captured even the cadence. I even improved the cadence in the editing part by spacing it better. And at any rate, once I got that audiobook out there, I sent them all the WAV files, and they were like, hey, this is great. This is better than probably what it would have been. So I was able to get my audiobook out through them. It's out there. People listen to it on Audible and whatnot. But it's nice to be able to adapt technologically. I think that was the question, is technology, and what can you use to your advantage? And yeah, me being able to do audio engineering, because I've done that with my podcast for so long, I was able to do that with this, but at a much higher level, more professional level. And so now it's out there in those different formats. So some people can hear it on the road while they're driving. Other people can read it on their Kindle. Other people, they want to feel the pages. They'll just buy a copy. So to adapt to what different people's sensibilities are, I think technology helps with that.
All right. So last question to close us out, the bonus question. So after something is published and finished, can you actually enjoy it, or do you find yourself looking for errors or trying to perfect it as you're going through it? I always like to ask that for writers and authors.
When I finish something, I'm a highly self-critical person by nature, and I know that if something is good, I can go back and look at it and not cringe. So I'll there are some stories where I'll go back and like, oh, I'm actually okay with this. It can be difficult to enjoy your own work if you're a self-critical person. Something my dad told me, which, you know, I would be shopping for something and I pick it up and I look for like busted corners or frayed whatever, and he's like, nothing's ever going to be perfect, which applies to this as well. If you're going for perfection, you're not going to get your stuff out. I just lettered a comic for a local Bay Area writer and illustrator, and he had planned to get this book out. He needed to get it printed because he's got a show coming up, a local show, and he could keep fussing and fussing and fussing and fussing, but if he wanted to get the book printed in time, he needed to let some things go. When you're looking at your own work, when I'm looking at my own work, it just needs to it needs to be as good as you can get it, and if the more you fuss over it, the longer it's going to take to get out. There will be a point when I'm drawing or writing, and I will literally say out loud, stop, or you're going to F it up. And as soon as I say that out loud, I stop. And I don't work on it anymore, and I move on to the next step. And that's my personal cue for letting myself know that's it, move forward. And then it gets put out, and I will still see all the mistakes. But the mistakes, on balance, as long as they're minimal, or they're not like glaring, they don't take away or detract from the overall thing, it's fine.
At this point, I've got over a dozen works in print. Anytime I go through and read them, I always find something wrong. There's always a typo. There's always a word that got dropped, and you just have to. You just got to let that go. You cannot push for the perfection to the extent that it prevents your work getting out. So yeah, I don't let that urge for perfectionism ruin my completing of the work. And I always reach a certain point where I say, all right, I'm done. And I'll type the end, and it's done. The other part is you put so much work into this. These are your children. Nothing in our house is happier than the day we get our first copies of our latest book. Opening those up, holding that book in your hand, there is something tangible about that is bloody wonderful, and it always will be.
I guess the main thing for me is that the research doesn't stop. So like one project kind of builds on the next. And, you know, sometimes, you know, I'll have a deadline and I'll finish something, and then like the next year I'll get some other research that completely contradicts whatever I thought that was back there. And you just have to kind of live with that you're going to keep like kind of, you know, growing and finding stuff out. I worked with Trina Robbins a lot. She wrote the first history of women cartoonists in like 1984, pre-internet. So everything was like, you know, letters from these random people and library research. And you know, she kept building and building. She did like 6 different histories about women cartoonists. And she'd always say, always read the latest one because the first one we just didn't know, you know, and she just, I love Trina. Yeah, well, I heard her a lot, you know, and you know, she just was a great mentor about that kind of thing because, you know, like Neil Gaiman says, you just have to finish things.
Looking back, I definitely learned what I could do better for the next one. I don't over nitpick it, but I am happy with the way they came out, and I'm glad I did them. And sometimes I will kind of just sit back and just read it cold after a while that I haven't looked at it, and I have fun, and I'm glad I'm holding it in my hand. But everything I look at, I kind of think, okay, I could do something different or different or more complex later. So it's a learning. Everything's learning. You take it in steps, but I'm proud of the whole thing.
Sometimes I read mine again just to remind myself that I can still do it.
If any of you are thinking about putting out your own comics, if we're talking specifically comics, it might make you feel better to know that comics readers are actually very forgiving, and it's not because they expect bad things to be put out. No comic reader, no fan of anything wants anything bad put in front of them. We've all witnessed fandom and their craziness, but comics fans expect evolution. Tom McFarlane's first work was nothing like what he's doing today. Jim Lee's first work, nothing like what he's doing today. You read Alan Moore's early stuff compared to what he's doing now. You read Neil Gaiman's stuff, Warren Ellison's, any writer, any artist, early stuff to now. Comics readers understand that evolution happens. The first issue is never going to hold up to what the last issue is going to be. There's always going to be some evolution. Comics readers know this. So if you're thinking about putting out your own thing and you're worried that your first issue or your first book or whatever is going to be not very good and you're afraid to put it out, just put it out. If it takes off, if people like it, they're going to want to read your next thing. If they don't like it, then you move on to the next thing. Comics readers expect that.
And that is our panel. So thanks for coming, everybody. Is there a panel behind us? There sure is. All right. So sorry, there's no time for Q&A.